Good afternoon, and welcome to today's G3 Academy webcast entitled Building Sustainable and Resilient Communities Through Greening Infrastructure and Leveraging Capital, showcasing G3 Communities Part 2. This webcast is sponsored by the EPA Region 3's Water Protection Division and is a part of the G3 Academy series of trainings. I'm Dominique Lukenhoff, Associate Director, Water Protection Division, EPA Region 3, and I will be moderating the webcast. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, we have a few tips to keep your webcast experience running smoothly. If you are hearing an echo, please close all browser windows except for the webcast presentation. You can also mute the presentation using the microphone icon in the lower left corner of your screen. If you are experiencing technical difficulties with the webcast, you can request assistance by entering your technical issue into the white box at the bottom of your screen just below the slide and clicking the Ask button. Your questions and the responses from our tech team will appear at the bottom of your screen below the white box where you entered the question. If you cannot see the Ask a Question box at the bottom of your screen, change your screen resolution by clicking on Tools in your web browser and selecting Zoom Out. If you would like to see closed captioning, please make sure that you have turned off your pop-up block and click on the Closed Captioning button on the top of your screen. During this webcast, we will poll participants to get a better sense of who you are and where you're from. To complete the poll questions and the evaluation form at the end of the webcast, select the radio button to the left of your choice and click Submit. Do not type your answer in the Ask box. Please note the tabs at the top of your webcast console on the Downloads tab. You can find some downloadable content, including the speaker contact information and additional information on the content of today's presentations. You can also see the Certificate tab. Everyone who participates in 60 minutes of the webcast is eligible to download the PDF copy of today's certificate. Communities in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and indeed throughout the country, are actively greening their infrastructure. From green streets to green buildings, they're helping to clean up the Chesapeake Bay and to build sustainable and resilient communities. The speakers in today's webcast will discuss how their efforts are used as building blocks in their integrated planning efforts for moving towards sustainability, provide some lessons learned, discuss their progress and challenges, and show how these efforts can leverage public and private funding. This webcast is targeted to professionals and community stakeholders interested in pursuing green streets, urban green infrastructure, and green jobs as part of an overall integrated community or watershed plan. We have some very special expert speakers here today to share their applications and experiences regarding their work in green infrastructure. Fazil Hamid is Chief of the Project Development and Environment Division for the District of Columbia Department of Transportation, DDOT. Fazil has served DDOT in various roles in the areas of design, planning, project development, and the environment. He has led various programs including context-sensitive design solutions, linking planning and NEPA, the DDOT Sustainability Plan, and the DDOT Environmental Management System. Fazil's projects have received various national awards, including the FHWA 2009 Environmental Excellence Award, the ITE 2008 National Award, the ACEC 2009 National Award, and the ASCE NCR 2013 Sustainability Award. And I do apologize for all the acronyms. We're doing this to actually get to the speakers themselves. If you're interested, just let us know. Pete Hill manages watershed planning and restoration activities for the Watershed Protection Division of the District of Columbia Department of Environment, DDOE. His programs include the suite of stormwater retrofit incentive programs collectively called the River Smart programs, environmental education programs for district students, and numerous stream and wetland restoration projects. He has worked in D.C. for 11 years and prior to this worked on forest health monitoring and stream characterization for the USDA Forest Service. Craig Carson is manager of the Watershed Restoration Program for Montgomery County, Maryland's Department of Environmental Protection. Craig oversees the implementation of the Capital Improvements Program and is responsible for implementing Montgomery County's impervious surfaces targets outlined in the county's municipal separate storm sewer system, their MS4 permit. One final note before we get started with our first speaker. We will try to answer as many of your questions as possible throughout this webcast. However, due to the high number of participants, not all questions will be answered. However, we have posted the speaker's contact information in case you would like to contact them after the webcast. You can find the speaker's contact information as well as a comprehensive resource list on the Downloads tab of your console. You will need Adobe Acrobat Reader to view the resource list document. I will now turn it over to Fazil Hamid of the District of Columbia Department of Transportation, who will begin today's webcast. Thanks, Fazil.
Thank you, Dominique. This is Fazil Hamid from DC Department of Transportation. And I am going to present on our successes policy-wise, implementation-wise, and challenges that we faced in implementing some of the green initiatives at the Department of Transportation. So a brief overview of what I'll be presenting, just to tie it together, how these green initiatives relate to sustainability, what these initiatives are, and some example projects. So basically, from policy to programming to implementation. Sustainability, as everybody knows, is the triple bottom approach. Sorry, I skipped a few slides. It balances the economy, environment, and social structure. And the way we define, the Department of Transportation defines sustainable transportation or green streets is basically it's balancing these different modal choices and safety and accessibility and mobility with economy, livability, and the environment. We have done and started a number of green initiatives at the department, and I will go through some of those briefly. Our first step was establishing an environmental policy. Based on that, we established an environmental management system. And those of you who are familiar with environmental management systems, we followed the ISO 14000 structure. We also established an environmental policy and process in the department, basically following the federal regulations, and created a manual based on that. We have implemented context-sensitive solutions at the department. The department has a complete streets policy. We also developed a sustainability plan a few years ago. And the most recent plan that we have started is the climate change adaptation plan. And I'll go through those shortly as we move forward. We have recently released our LID standards, and those of you who are familiar with the Anacostia waterfront, we did create our design standards or guidelines for that area. There are a number of people. There are a number of people actually who work in the department on all these issues. So I'm just presenting a lot of those. The credit belongs to everyone who works on those, especially the stormwater branch, who's not here, but they were nice enough to give me some slides to present today. The first thing we did was we established an environmental policy, which basically was signed by the director, and it committed us to incorporating environmental thinking in all of our processes. And if you're familiar with the transportation project development process, we basically committed that during every step of the way, from planning to design to construction, we will incorporate environmental thinking in those processes, and also review those to ensure that we're also in compliance with the federal and the local regulations. This document was released almost 4 years ago, and the plan itself asks for an annual reporting mechanism that can be used to improve the process. The next thing that we developed was a sustainability plan, and based on that, we highlighted 8 key areas, which was basically promoting transportation and land use, improving modal choices, effective cost assessments and decision making, improving DDOT operations, protecting the environment, conserving the resources, developing climate change adaptation, and promoting livability and safety. And based on those focus areas, we have developed performance measures that can be monitored. Back in the days, a few years ago, Federal Highway was very keen on implementing context-sensitive solutions. It is a great way of actually making your projects sustainable. We worked with Federal Highway at that time. We were one of the first few states after the first 5 pilot states to start using this process in our project development system. Since the department uses federal aid funds on a number of projects, we also have to comply with federal regulations as well as local regulations. So based on that, we actually created our environmental process manual a few years ago, and which includes all of our processes to comply with the requirements of NEPA, Clean Water Act, Historic Preservation Act, and a number of other laws and regulations. And we constantly update it with the new coming regulations. And the last update was done only last year. And actually, all of these documents are available on our website if you want to take a look at them. Our most recent one plan or project is the Climate Change Adaptation Plan. There's a lot of focus right now on climate change, particularly in the area of climate change action plans. Ours is a little different. This is where the Department of Transportation are going. If you talk with AASHTO or Federal Highway, it's much more about the adaptation now than coming up with action plans. And we started this project last year and finished it in December. The plan was released in December, and it is on our website. In that process, we actually looked at the state of the art and the state of the practice. There are a number of climate change indicators, as you know, the temperature, sea level rise, precipitation. Those of you who were in DC during the Snowmageddon saw that, or the recent thunderstorms and the hurricanes that we faced. Based on the review that we did, we found that there are 3 key areas that actually affect DC the most. And it will depend on your state or your city if you're producing a plan for yourself. But for us, we felt like temperature, sea level rise, and precipitation were the 3 key areas that affected DC the most. Based on that, we started with our greenhouse gas inventory analysis, which was much more on the operations side and the department. However, we wanted to take it to the next step, which was to actually come up with some kind of action plans, how to adopt the infrastructure to this changing climate. which is a little bit of a challenge, if you will. Not a lot of cities or states have done this. We looked at the examples nationwide, and I believe state of Washington is in the process of completing one. State of Maryland is in the process of completing one, and we work with those states to guide us in this process, as well as we work with Federal Highway. We actually also did two workshops, one of which was actually a national workshop sponsored by AASHTO. We had national presence in that from AASHTO, from New York State DOT, Maryland State Highway, EPA, Federal Highway, and a number of other agencies. And the last one we did was a few months ago with Federal Highway, DOE, WashCog, and others. And those workshops were really helpful for us in guiding us to create a plan that actually can help us adapt our infrastructure to this changing climate. And the slide that you see on the screen actually is a map of DC area with potential flood zones. And as you know, with the sea level rise, if you are in areas which are close to the shore or close to tidal rivers, that can be one of the challenges that you face. Same thing with the changing temperatures. And so what we found was due to these climate change issues, we would probably have to get ourselves prepared for the future. So based on that, we came up with an action plan. This slide actually shows you our different climate change indicators or variables and our assets and how they can affect our assets. And as you can see, I won't go into all of these in detail. I'll just speak briefly with some of them, especially with sea level rise. Like I said, flooding can be an issue, especially our bridges can be affected, the clearances to the bridges can be affected, scoring can be an issue. And as we saw in Hurricane Sandy, it wasn't actually sea level rise. However, a lot of tunnels in those areas also got flooded. So the infrastructure is prone to these changes in climate, and that is, you can call the flooding for the tunnels an effect of precipitation as well. But the idea was that we have to take a look at all of our assets and see how much they are vulnerable to these changing to this changing climate. We based on that, we actually scored our assets from low to medium to high, and then based on that came up with a kind of an executive summary recommendation plan that we are taking to our leadership. This slide shows you the recommendations we came up with. I'm not going to go into detail in every single one of these bullets. However, basically the idea was the science of climate change is evolving. There's a lot of research going on in that area, and you probably have to look at every single indicator in detail and then come up with a recommendation. Also, it depends on a number of assumptions that you have in that analysis, especially with the greenhouse gas emissions. And based on that, your outputs can change. We do need to, one of the biggest recommendations was that probably when you are working in those priority areas, if you will, where those effects can be the most, the design, the planning work should include consideration of climate change. And your typical standards or your typical practices may not be the only thing that you have to consider. So you may have to change the design of your culvert, if you will, or the opening of your culvert, or may have to design for more stormwater than you thought. But that's the idea. Those were some of the recommendations. Of course, finance and economy plays a major role in these. So one of the recommendations was, once you start looking at adaptation, you probably also need to start setting up funding for that. My next slide is on the AWI design guidelines, and those of you who've worked in this area know this. We created these guidelines for all of our transportation work in the Anacostia waterfront area, and we came up with a series of recommendations for stormwater management, using low impact development, using recycled material, adding more alternative modes of transportation, preserving history, and adding more space, green space, and access to the waterfront. This document is also available online, and you may have seen this repeated many times in our presentations. Low impact development is actually one of the key areas that we also work in. We have a stormwater branch, and which also works on, which is the lead on the low impact development, and they recently released our new LID standards, which we did not have before. And I know Pete Hill from DOE is probably going to speak more to that. But I just want to cover that briefly, that we do consider low impact development in our transportation projects, and we have been successfully using them, and I'll show you some of the examples that I have later on. Some of the example projects. The first one I was going to highlight is the Klingle Road project. This was recently completed. This was one of our most controversial projects. It took us almost 10 years to get it through the environmental review process. And in the end, the design we came up with was basically it will enhance the stream that runs parallel to the abandoned roadway. The roadway will be converted into a bike trail, and there was a law passed to ask us to actually convert the roadway into a bike trail. However, in order to make the project work, we had to work with National Park Service and EPA and DOE and come up with an innovative solution for the Klingle Creek, which runs parallel to the right-of-way. And we actually ended up enhancing the stream itself. The cost of the project, actually almost half the cost of the project, is for stream restoration and to capture the stormwater runoff from not the transportation right of way, but from the adjoining land uses. And actually that was one of the key things that actually helped us get the project through, because more than likely, without going through the stream restoration and enhancing the stream, the project would not have been, wouldn't be able to move forward. So that was one of our key successes in 10 years or so. Nanny Helen Burroughs project was one of the Green Highway Partnership projects. Dom and her team helped us a lot in that one. It also received a grant from EPA to implement stormwater management and LID practices. The project is almost done. I think it's done, and it included a number of LID techniques, including bioswales and bioretention cells. This project actually is in the northeast area near DC 295. And my last slide is about Oregon Avenue, which we recently completed. This is again a roadway which runs parallel to a stream near Rock Creek, actually runs parallel to Rock Creek as well. And stormwater has been one of the main issues for the deterioration of the roadway. Again, it took us many years, almost 7 to 8 years, to get this project through. However, we came up with some innovative solutions for this project. We worked with Dawn and her team on this one too. And we came up with managing the stormwater in the transportation infrastructure by using spot LIDs, but also incorporating the tree boxes as LID units. So we were able to capture and meet all the 1.2 inches retention standards, but we were actually also able to maintain the transportation interest by getting the project through. It took us many years to get this project agreed upon by DDOT and MPS and Federal Highway. So that was one of our key successes. Again, looking at the project through sustainability, through stormwater management actually helped us move the project through. And that was all I had. I do want to acknowledge other people who actually helped me with these presentations. Meredith Upchurch and Reggie Arno from our stormwater branch actually do a lot of work in LID and stormwater management. And that was my last slide. I actually just wanted to put all of this together much more from a policy and a program perspective rather than just the implementation perspective. And Dominique, that's all I had.
That's great. Thanks, Fazil. That was excellent information, and I'm sure you're going to get some questions. Before we have our questions for Fazil, there are some quick poll questions for you to answer, you, the audience. Once you answer, you'll be able to view the results of the poll immediately, and they will refresh with the most updated results as more people answer. I work for. Please click on the radio button that best describes who you work for. Local government, state government, federal government, nonprofit, green infrastructure industry, academia, other. While we're waiting, I would like to direct your attention to the Downloads tab on your console. Here you'll be able to find a PDF copy of the slides from today's presentation for your review and download. We also have an additional resources document available that includes the speaker's contact information and informational links relevant to today's webcast. And now I believe we have the answers to the poll question, who do you work with? And everyone should be able to see local government, 9%, state government, 27%, federal government, 27%, nonprofit, 5%. Let's see, we missed green infrastructure industry, but we have academia and other. Academia, 9%, other, 23%. Great. And now for the next poll question. How many people are participating in the webcast today at your location? Please click on the radio button that best describes how many people are watching the webcast from your location. Just me, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 10 to 20, more than 20. While we wait for these poll results, I want to remind everyone that the archives of all of our past webcasts, as well as more green infrastructure information, is available on the G3 Academy website. The URL for this website is on the Additional Resources document available on your Downloads tab. And now we should have the answers to the second poll. All right, I'm going to refresh and here are the answers. So it looks like 91% of us are working and watching this webcast alone, just me. 2 to 5, we've got 5%. 6 to 10, 1, and 5%. Sorry, I'm really confusing everyone. I think the main thing is that we've got individuals participating in today's webcast. So we've got some questions for Fazil, and I think with time allowing, we've got a few minutes more. Fazil, here's one of the questions. How do your green streets relate to your complete streets?
Good question. So actually, a green street, we have a complete streets policy, which basically means that we will consider all modes when we actually do anything with our streets. The Green Street program that we have actually is much more tailored toward stormwater management and incorporating more green elements in the roadway. Some of them are looking at removing pavement, like medians and other things, and making them green space, or adding, bioretention or tree boxes. And actually, also they're looking into pervious pavement, and I think our Green Alleys program in particular is looking much more in detail into that. So they are related, but actually they're kind of it's two different policies and programs. However, at the end of the day, it's the same street. So the idea is that whenever we actually plan or design a street, not only we consider all modes, however, we also consider the environment, including not only stormwater management, but in the city we have also other things like historic preservation is one of our key issues. Trees is another a major component of our work. We are actually also looking at adding LED lights. We already have the signals LED, but we are also looking at LED lights now. So that's how they are related. Does that answer the question?
Yes, great. And in fact, along those lines, since you mentioned alleys, green alleys, next question, actually there are a couple that are related to leveraging resources. One is, how is DDOT leveraging resources to retrofit and create green streets and alleys? And then the next one is leveraging the participation of the different agencies on your climate strategy. But let's perhaps go to the green streets and alleys, and how are you getting them done?
Sure. The green streets, actually, it's being funded through different programs. If in resources, if you want to talk about funding first, we do use federal aid funds. So the city and the district is unique in a way that we do get federal aid funds, so we get treated as a state DOT. So we do have those federal aid funds that we can use on federal aid eligible streets. So that's one source of funding. Sometimes when we actually are not working on federal aid streets, there are also some other additional funds that we can use. Before MAP 21, which is the Transportation Authorization Bill, which was approved last year, it used to be called Transportation Enhancements, TE funds. With MAP 21, it has been changed to now Transportation Alternatives. So that's another source of funding that we can use, and we are trying to leverage that. The other funds that we sometimes get are grants, like the Green Highways Partnership Grant that we got from EPA. Sometimes we work with our Department of Environment, and Pete Hill can probably answer that question better. And we work with them and use some of the funds through MS4 program or some of the other green initiatives that Department of Environment has. So there are a number of ways that you can leverage these funds. And again, these, especially the federal funds, come with local match requirements. We do sometimes also get local funds from council to work on these issues. So basically, these are some of the key sources of funding that we have used on the Green Streets and Green Alleys program. In terms of climate change and working with the partnering agencies, we actually partnered with a number of agencies. The first thing we did when we actually started our climate change adaptation plan was we did this huge climate change workshop with a number of agencies, actually not only just local but also federal and regional agencies, and we actually had people from Maryland State Highway and actually New York State DOT attend that meeting. And Ashton was there, Denise was there too. So we started on that regard. The implementation is actually, climate change, as everybody knows, is not one agency. One agency just cannot make everything happen on climate change. So you do need support of other agencies, and you have to work collaboratively. So what we did on the climate change as well was we actually also worked closely with DOE. Since DOE was developing the climate change action plan for the city, We worked with the Climate Change Action Group pretty closely, and then what we did was we took that one step further and focused that much more on transportation, and also came up with also what needs to be done for the infrastructure itself. Not just the greenhouse gas emissions because of the roadway users or the fleet or the facility itself, but also these climate change events are now affecting the infrastructure itself, and we need to be prepared for that. So we took that step, and we took it one step further and looked at what is needed so that we can also start planning for the next few years to come.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll remind everyone for Q&A sessions, you need to plug in your questions online. And Fazal, I know that you can't spend the entire time with us today, so we'll have to wrap up soon. But another question is on your environmental management system. And could you talk a little bit about that and how it relates to all your different green initiatives and other D.business?
That is a great question, because it seems like you have, and so do we, a number of plans, and they mean the same thing, and they should be all tied together. Environmental management system is, as a lot of you may know, is actually a way of thinking, if you will. It's a business process. It's not a software. It's not something that you can plug in and use the next day. It's kind of a culture change. It's your process and how you modify that process to incorporate environmental thinking. And then based on that, you can come up with more initiatives and focused and targeted programs that you can use to improve your environmental thinking in the department. So what we did was we basically took a little different approach on our environmental management system than some other federal agencies had because of the executive order. A number of federal agencies actually implemented EMS, especially on their facility side. What we did was we actually, instead of looking at just the facilities, we actually looked at our business process and looked at the highest area of our impact, which was basically, since we are a transportation project delivery organization, that's the bulk of our work. So we decided to actually focus our EMS on how do we deliver projects. And there are a number of processes out there for environmental management system, but the most structured one is ISO 14000, and that's the one that we used. So basically what we did was we looked at all the process steps, including our project development process, and then ensured that we add those environmental key features in those processes. And we created some tools to help us check those off, like checklists. What we also came up with was one of the key things that came up with, when we move projects from one phase, from planning to design to construction, we require the environmental review of all those projects, and not just on the compliance side, because environmental management system is not just compliance, actually is a way of environmental thinking, but also to ask, okay, did you consider additional environmental features? Did you consider LID, or did you consider trees or some other areas? And based on that, actually what we have, the way the whole system was set up was that we document all those, and then at the end of the year we go back and check what we did, and then based on those findings, then we recommend an improvement to the process. And actually we have improved our process based on that for the past 4 or 5 years that we have started using our EMS. We have updated our tools, our processes or our forms almost every year. We updated our environmental manual last year. It's quite a substantial undertaking. If you look at the size of the manual, it's almost 1,000 pages, like 30 some chapters. But that was part of our commitment, that based on our observations and our results, we'll go back and update our processes. And that's what we did with those. So it's not really, I can't give you that we reduced the paper consumption or we reduced the fleet, because honestly we did not implement EMS more on that side. We did have an office function and we did report on that, but we kept our our main focus on the bulk of our activity, which was project development and project delivery. And that's where we see the most benefit. In the past 5 years or so since we have started using EMS, we have not had any projects that have not gone through proper environmental review. Our internal review rate is 100%, and that's quite an achievement for us, because before that we had lots of lapses in our review process.
That's great, and I'm sure this is a great model for other DOTs and large organizations that are implementing projects system-wide that are out there. So we're really happy that you shared that today. We're going to actually thank you, Fazil. We know you have to run soon, and again, I'll remind everyone that they can get additional information on the Downloads tab. And I will again give our thanks to Fazil for all of those informative answers in that super presentation. And now we'll turn it over to Pete Hill of the District of Columbia Department of Environment. Take it away, Pete.
Thanks, Dominique. Hi, my name is Pete Hill, and I work as the branch chief of the Planning and Restoration branch within the District Department of the Environment. I'm looking forward to showing the audience today how we at DDOE are building community support for green infrastructure and green streets specifically. Let me advance the slide. Just to check, is this slide advancing?
Let me see if I can do something about that.
Okay.
How's that?
Not coming up on my end, but.
Okay, it is up on the factors.
Oh,
factors, okay.
Okay, then I may just have to ask you to advance it then.
Sure, happy to.
Okay. Computer's freezing. So in the planning world, numerous factors influence residents' acceptance of Green Street projects. And in 2010, a few years back, DDOE issued 3 grants to design teams who worked with residents on developing conceptual designs for 3 different streets in the city. DDOE selected these sites with DDOT and input from the design teams. And the reason we did this is we had encountered some resistance to these ideas, not only from the community but within government, and we wanted to build community support, which we thought would result in increased funding.
Okay, next slide.
Oh, good. There, now it's up. Okay. Additionally, I'm going to discuss these design charrettes, but additionally, and through a separate process, DDOE worked with the communities to install LID practices through a program we called River Smart Communities. And this is kind of a unique feature of what we're doing here, I think. I think the small-scale projects on the multifamily housing units complement the design work on the streets and build mutual support. And although DDOE is not generally tasked with roadway problems, I don't want anyone to think that I'm a roadway engineer in this audience, but we nonetheless learned about the residents' issues through these design and community engagement projects. The issues that came up most frequently were safety related to high-speed traffic, and flooding issues generally caused by clogged catch basins, but not solely. Both these concerns are actually great motivators to get communities to embrace green streets. And rather than building a lot of speed bumps, as you can see here, which we have many of in DC, green streets can actually slow traffic through bump outs, and flooding can be mitigated through properly constructed bioretention. A big role of my branch is to develop watershed plans. The purpose of these plans is to focus district efforts towards roadway work, stream restoration, residential retrofits, and a host of other activities that have the potential to improve local water quality. Although it is frequently challenging to direct the efforts of a city to 1 or 2 specific areas, 2 projects that I will describe here were located in a watershed that we have targeted. Watts Branch is a tributary of the Anacostia River and has received over $15 million in roadway, stream, path rehabilitation, and homeowner retrofits over the last 7 to 8 years. In these projects, the planning document did focus the efforts of numerous agencies, district and federal. The funding picture reveals multiple sources, however each has its limitations. DDOE used EPA 319 funding for the design and outreach efforts that will be described. An important factor for implementation is that residential streets are generally not eligible for FHA funding. DDOT has made use of FHA funding for some of its Great Street projects, which Faisal had mentioned here, which have incorporated lots of Green Street elements. However, the majority of the streets are residential, and thus federal funding is not readily available. We see a major source going forward will be the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and MS4 funding for the areas in the district in the MS4, or the separate sewer system. In DC, we have numerous nonprofits who have taken on the stormwater issue in general. They have played important roles in reaching out to the community and building support. Although there are many residents who are motivated primarily by environmental concerns, generally speaking, in relation to roadways, other issues such as safety tend to trump them. However, Green Streets provide an opportunity to build support by taking care of numerous issues at once. Getting to the projects, the first I want to discuss is the J Street Mayfair Mansions project. This site came to our attention because of ongoing flooding of J Street in Northeast DC, which prevented traffic from passing after even a moderate rain event. Additionally, it was in the targeted watershed of Watts Branch, which I mentioned earlier. Although the local engagement leadership wasn't a big factor early on, it became a bigger issue during the second phase of the project, the River Smart Communities portion. Importantly, DDOE applied for ARA stimulus funding for the project and received $600,000. This definitely helped spur the project towards completion. Here's a picture of the retrofits before and after. You can see the flooded roadway. The storm drain system was directed to Watts Branch, which was only approximately 150 feet away, and was clogged by sediment from the stream. An interesting component of this project is there was really no way to improve the drainage of the existing pipe system without dredging the stream, which would not be allowed or would not be an appropriate solution. The installation of bioretention was really the only way to address the flooding successfully and also achieve important pollutant reductions. Here's a locator map where you can see where the project is located. The J Street project is in the red arrow. And the buildings inside of the horseshoe-shaped roadway are two subsidized housing complexes, Mayfair Mansions and Paradise at Parkside. Here's a close-up of the area, and you can see where we installed the bioretention facilities, and then also the specific cisterns and basecaping that I'll talk about in just a minute. As I mentioned, we did apply for stimulus funding, and the street project was constructed to treat over 50,000 square feet of impervious area, and a big win for us was the fact that we were able to mitigate this roadway flooding that had been a problem for I think over a decade. Some of our lessons learned are probably familiar to many of you. One big issue, one stumbling block was the LIDA design standards that Faisal had mentioned had not yet been approved, and so we had some challenges getting approval for inlet designs. There were some safety concerns that were unresolved that became stumbling blocks. However, we did work through them eventually. Also, maintenance and training the maintenance workers on how to treat this particular bioretention cell was an issue initially. However, having the funding deadline specifically associated with ARA did help us out. It's a scenario we like to term playing the ARA card around here, which did help us get through some of these barriers. And here you can see a picture of the installed practices. Sort of the second phase of this is after the project was completed, we went in and worked with the community to install two cisterns, 500-gallon, 800-gallon cistern, These practices were they were embraced by the community in part because they had developed a community garden which needed water, and we also put in basecaping and took out a lot of turf. We did this through the program we call River Smart Communities, which provides stormwater BMPs to multifamily residences at advantageous cost share. Here are the pictures of the cisterns you can see. The reason this project worked, and also the reason we can continue with them, is that the residents saw a great example of these practices working in the roadway. They saw that it solved the problem. As I mentioned, it also helped with their water demand in the garden. Importantly, the local nonprofit Groundwork Anacostia helped build the garden, also helped its acceptance of the stormwater features. We see this site as having tons of potential. There's 17 large buildings. The site encompasses over 10 acres. The housing management company is quite progressive about this, which is great. We are finding that with the new stormwater fee that's based upon impervious surface, where you're charged based upon the amount of your impervious surface, wise property managers see an opportunity to reduce the fees in the long term, and this has really helped us. They also own several other properties in the district, so we're currently working with them to do more. In just a little detail about that, we're putting $350,000 next year towards the retrofits of these properties, and our current funding breakout is that we are providing 60% of the construction costs, and the property owner is putting in 40%, up to a certain maximum. So the second project I want to talk to you about has not been constructed, but we went through this planning process thanks to some 319 funding. The street is Dick Street, and the neighboring community is Richardson Dwellings. The project is also in the Watts Branch watershed, where there is an active nonprofit, Washington Parks and People. These were the two main factors that we selected this project and is driving it forward, indicated by a slightly larger size. Here's the locator map, and you can see we're further up in the watershed with the blue arrow. This is actually right across from the Nanny Helen Bros project that Faisal had discussed. Interesting things about this project, it runs parallel to Watts Branch, our targeted stream, and it's on the other side is a public housing project that's slated for redevelopment at some point. After meeting with the residents, safety issues came to the fore, particularly related to speeding traffic and adequate sidewalks. So DDOE in 2010 provided a grant to Washington Parks and People and Sustainable Life Designs to run community outreach and develop 35% designs. Over 150 people were engaged in the process, and it is a 4-block area, quite a big area from Division to 55th. And you can see in these pictures how our partners got people out and got them thinking about how to re-envision the street. The next 3 slides show the site. First one here shows the drainage area, which is quite extensive due to the topography. It drains essentially upward or north on your slide, and so that you can see the drainage area is quite significant. And you can see some familiar design options that were embraced by the community, such as bump outs. Some unique design elements are how the design team incorporated this into the nearby park, creating a more formal entrance. So what we learned here was, although residents were interested in stream health, the primary concern was safety and high speeding traffic. We also discovered that there's a great potential to treat stormwater. Over 6 acres could be treated in the roadway with proper design. And for those of you who are familiar with DC's MS4 permit, it requires that the district retrofit 34.4 acres of roadway retrofits in a 5-year permit cycle. So this would be a really good project to help us meet that requirement. Some of the question marks are the fact that the public housing redevelopment is a little bit in funding limbo. But DDOT is likely to pursue implementation if we can find some local funding. This is one where FHA funding would not be available. So the third project I wanted to discuss was a site in southeast DC. It's in the Oxen Run watershed. The cross sections are 13th and Valley, and the community is called Wheeler Terrace. So the design team was led by Casey Trees and Green Urban, and they engaged this multifamily housing complex in design charrettes. We issued a grant, as with the other sites, approximately $60,000 to do the design, stormwater calculations, and the outreach. This particular project is adjacent to Oxen Run, which has numerous water quality impairments, and DDOE had developed about the same time a watershed implementation plan for Oxen Run, which was approved by EPA. Just to bring it kind of back to the stream, this particular stream has a lot of the problems that you would expect to see in an urban area. We have a flashy hydrograph driven by stormwater flows, some eroded sewer lines, sanitary sewer lines, eroded and unstable banks, and lots of trash. Here's, you can see the site a little more up close. You can see the channelized stream at the top of the photo, and the retrofits focused on this area kind of at the intersection, although many of these practices could be extended along Valley for quite some ways. This is a district park that the complex is adjacent to. And you can see the sites in the courtyard where we installed the cistern and the rain garden. And I apologize for the readability of this slide. You probably cannot see it, but I'll just walk you through it a little bit. What it does call for are bioretention cells on the north side of the street that were integrated into more formal entrances and a pedestrian crossing. And on the south side, numerous stormwater features such as silva cells and tree trenches were incorporated. This was Casey Trees that did the design, so you can, it's nice to see those practices. And these were designed to establish a nice tree canopy in the area, which it did not have. And the unique part of this grant is that Casey Trees hired residents to assist with the community outreach and organizing. It's a big issue in this particular community with 22.5% unemployment in Ward 8. Translating this work into jobs is extremely resonant in this community. Another component is DDOT has a bike trail that's going to be going in that same area, and this might help spur the implementation. We're also hoping that now the residents are savvy about stormwater, they'll be able to push for this project. The speeding issue was immediately addressed with speed bumps. However, we feel if the Green Street project was implemented, we could do the same thing. Now, after this design project, we went to these residents and we worked with them to install a rain garden cistern, and this will be installed in May, shortly. This worked here because the community garden really is the focal point for this multifamily residence, and it's actually the same management company, which, as I spoke before, is very dialed into this and is a really great partner. So we're excited about this project and see great potential for it getting constructed. Similar to Mayfair Mansions, these are big buildings. There's a lot of space. 100% capture really is achievable in a cost-effective manner. And the management company is interested in scaling up, so we will be working with them. The last project I wanted to discuss is Everett Street in Northwest DC. It drains to Rock Creek. This area had a really strong local leader who also, there were some planning initiatives with our district Department of Planning that had looked at this area. So we chose this, and we worked with LID Design Center. They did the outreach and charrettes here. They did a slightly different, took a slightly different approach. They held lots of meetings, but they produced a handbook which the residents could use to educate themselves about a whole host of stormwater practices. And you can see these are some cutouts from the very nice handbook that they produced. This particular area, the issues were about cut-through traffic. It was in between Nebraska and Connecticut Avenue, which are major roads, and a lot of people were cutting through to sort of shorten their commute. The alleyway was a big issue, mainly because it was a drop-off area for a daycare facility, but residents were concerned about cars speeding in that area. And currently, funding is not available for this particular Green Street, although numerous residents have taken part in our River Smart Homes program, which is similar to the River Smart Communities, however, just targeted towards single-family homes. So these residents are also interested and ready. And here you can see the roadway in green and then the alleyway in purple. One issue in this particular, go back to the picture of the trees, we found that the tree canopy was actually a problematic issue. They had some nice trees, and incorporating stormwater treatment into there without damaging the trees was an issue. In this picture on the right, you can see there's quite a bit of space in this instance, but in much of the street, the existence of a large canopy was a design challenge. And that's all I had to explain our efforts, but I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you so much for listening.
Pete, that was super. Really enjoyed that presentation, and clearly there's a lot of greening going on in the district. Let's take some questions. One is you've highlighted that not all local streets, or in fact all DC streets, are available for or actually candidates for federal funding, and I think Fazil indicated that as well. What about the market? And could you perhaps talk about some interest there, the credit program, and perhaps what DC and DDOE sees as some opportunities through which to address or retrofit these streets?
Sure, that's a really promising avenue. DC has developed a stormwater retention credit trading system, and the general gist is that new development would need to capture, I believe it's 0.75 inches of the 1.2 inch retention credit requirement on site, but that remaining portion the requirement could be met by others doing the work in different parts of the city. We hope what will happen is that in places, particularly say in the downtown core, where land prices are very high and space is at a premium, that it may be more cost effective for developers to essentially pay for people to do retrofits in other parts of the city. The benefit of this is that many of these exterior areas are not developing as quickly, and so they're not getting redeveloped. They're not getting the stormwater improvement. Secondly, it's a greater environmental benefit. I think as you saw with all of these projects, I highlighted ones right next to the stream. We're very interested in improving water quality and stream health. You're going to have a greater impact by doing this out here next to these streams. Another sort of technical issue, which is best described by a slide, is that you actually capture more stormwater by having two projects that cumulatively meet the 1.2 inch retention credit. It's kind of hard to explain without a slide, but that is an interesting factor. So in the next year, we're going to be getting the system up and this trading system going, and we really hope that there will be essentially independent contractors who come out and do this work and then will sell these credits. It's a really exciting potential because this would allow us to do tons of retrofits with with minimal government investment, and at a time with shrinking budgets and shrinking staff, this is really an appealing option. So stay tuned. Might be a topic of another webcast, but we really think this would be a really promising avenue for getting these projects done, because there's a ton of them. I selected just 4, but there are millions of these that could be done.
Which certainly reflect the state of many of our communities. Along the same lines, given the presence of the federal government, what do you believe are some opportunities to get? You've got a great diverse set of partners that you've demonstrated involved in a number of these projects. Can you speak to what you see as partnering opportunities for other federal agencies such as HUD or USDA or DOI? There's the Urban Federal Partnership, Urban Waters Federal Partnership there.
Sure. I think HUD would be a great opportunity. We've really found that we started out working with single-family homes, and there was a great interest in multifamily housing units, and I think it turns out that these stormwater practices maybe are even more effective in multifamily housing and public housing. You typically have more space. There's a greater potential to have these stormwater features be a point of gathering, and really perhaps a beautification of the ground. So I think working with HUD is really crucial, and it's a great growth opportunity. A lot of the streets are really a district responsibility, but we hope to, if the cuts aren't too deep, we hope to tap into the Clean Water State Revolving Fund for some of these projects. So there's a lot of ways, and we work with EPA all the time. As I sort of indicated, EPA has really allowed us to really to go forward on these initiatives, and so we're pretty closely linked with you guys.
And speaking of EPA, how do these projects or this implementation relate to the Bay TMDL WIP implementation?
Well, it's all in there. We've counted for a certain amount of retrofitting. I think more and more of the permit and the Bay implementation WIP are going to be, as deliverables are going to be melded. We have a whole host of other things like stream restoration projects and green roof retrofitting that are included in that as well. So for us, it's a whole laundry list of activities that we have to do, and this would just be one that we could count towards that.
You also spoke about the importance of other benefits to implementing green streets and green infrastructure, that being local jobs. Could you speak to job training as it relates to that?
I can try. We really don't handle that so much, although I think it's a huge component. I think that finding a way to get local residents, unemployed residents, involved in this work is not only the right thing to do, but it's really going to build support for this kind of work. And I don't want to say too much about it because it's really not my field of expertise, but just as sort of seeing it, stepping back and seeing it, it's a critical part. There are lots of different angles of work related to this, everything from doing maintenance on the work to doing the construction to doing the design and calculations for the work. There's a lot of points of access for people, but I think it's really essential for those of us interested in this kind of work to really figure out how to solve that, because without it's just without bringing in that angle, we're just not going to have long-term support, and the funding is not going to be there.
Agreed, and I think this is an area that there are many organizations across public and private sector working on. Another question, and this pertains to your certainly your background in forestry, is can you speak to the evolution of the classic city street tree? I know every time I'm in D.C., there's so many wonderful neighborhoods with these beautiful old green, trees that certainly your River Smart homes took off without marketing. The demand went way up, and D.C. residents love their green streets and certainly their trees. But there have been challenges with regards to trees along streets and trees in highly impervious areas. Can you talk to the design and technology and what's happening to address that?
A little bit. I can mention that we're one of the stimulus projects that was funded. DDOT's Urban Forestry Administration went and expanded several tree boxes, which reduced impervious surface in the city, but also they did it in a targeted way to get these tree boxes where the trees had sort of expanded their existing space. Another thing that's going on is DDOT is redeveloping, putting out new standards for tree boxes, which are larger. And they're trying a lot of other different kinds of things, which are interesting. Things like structural soils, and they're even trying some biosolids in the tree pits to improve the soil quality. So they're doing a lot of good stuff related to that. We have a lot of storms, a lot of trees coming down, so it's kind of always a catch-up game. The River Smart Homes program has been really good at getting trees on private property, and that's really where my particular group is focused. We see it as really the most cost-effective, best management practice, and our partner Casey Trees has done a lot of that. Well, really all of the tree planting for that particular program, and it's very popular. So we do have requirements of the trees having to be a medium-sized tree, so we're not planting small ornamentals, but that is, that's a big focus as well. If people had additional questions, I'd really refer them to the Urban Forestry Administration, who deals with the tree issues on the public space on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that was super, and I know that I could personally ask you like another 20 questions. You've provided so much rich information here, and certainly a good overview to give everyone a sense of all of the activity going on in the district. So we do have to move on, and we certainly thank you, Pete, for sharing this all. I'm going to now hand it off to our final speaker, Craig Carson of Montgomery County, Maryland's Department of Environmental Protection. Take it, Craig.
Thank you, Dominique. And again, my name is Craig Carson, and I'm the manager of the Watershed Restoration Program at Montgomery County. And today I'm just going to talk about our Green Streets program, give you a little bit of background of our program and some of our projects, why we're implementing the projects, and focus on a little bit of the maintenance of these projects. To give you a little bit of background on Montgomery County, if you're not familiar with the region, it's about 500 square mile county with about 1 million people that speak 184 languages, so that makes it a challenge for us to get our message out. About 12% of the county is impervious, which is approximately the size of Washington, D.C. And we have about 1,500 miles of streams. With 2 major basins, primarily Potomac drains most of the watersheds, while about 12% of the county drains the Patuxent in the east. And we have 8 primary watersheds. This slide represents a lot of the urban impacts that we face, where you have a lot of impervious area connected to the storm drain system, a lot of areas uncontrolled, which results in eroded streams, exposed infrastructure, water and sewer lines, increased storm flows, and then with all the impervious, decreased base flows, which results in poor aquatic habitat and water quality. In 2010, Montgomery County was issued an updated stormwater permit, or MS4 permit, which requires us to treat 20% of our impervious area that is not to the MEP, which equals to about 4,300 acres in the county. One strategy of the permit is to implement green streets. And the idea of implementing our green street program is to be able to treat the runoff close to the source, which about 1/3 of the impervious area are roadways in Montgomery County. And we're doing this by utilizing what we consider the green panel, which is the green patch between the curb and the sidewalk, and also reducing the cross-section of the roads where it's appropriate, and also utilizing adjacent green space along the roadways. We are not going in and upgrading the whole infrastructure of the road. We are just retrofitting the existing road as it is in the landscape. Some of the examples of the practices include rain gardens, fire retention gardens, bioswales, tree boxes, curbed extensions, impervious sidewalk, and permeable pavers. The reason we're implementing green streets is to maximize stormwater management, to improve stream conditions in Montgomery County, improve water quality treatment, and encourage infiltration. As part of the Montgomery County's MS4 permit, we're required, as I previously discussed, 20% impervious area that's not controlled to the MEP, or 4,300 acres. We also have a Potomac trash treaty, which the county has signed on. And we have various TMDLs plus a trash TMDL for the Anacostia. Also, part of our permit is to increase the use of environmental site design or a low-impact development. As for project selection, our projects have been selected through either the Anacostia Restoration Plan, which was a cooperative effort between Army Corps of Engineers, Prince George's County, and the District of Columbia, and COG and various other partners, and other watershed studies that were pulled together into our countywide implementation strategy, which is our roadmap to implementing our MS4 program. And on top of that, we have coordinated with our Department of Transportation when they are doing roadway maintenance and other rehabilitation work within the right-of-way. That gives us an opportunity to go in and implement projects, coordinate with the Department of Transportation, and each department is impacting the area once and then pulling out, and hopefully we make the neighborhood much greener. As for some of the Green Street locations, first in Sligo Creek, we have a series of 7 projects. One has been completed and various projects are in design and construction. So today I'll emphasize just a few of these projects that primarily focus on Rock Creek and the Anacostia watershed. Northwest Branch, we have 1 project currently in design, and in Paint Branch, we finished White Oak, and we have Anderson Street, Tanley Road neighborhoods that are in future contracts that will be finalized by the end of the fiscal year. And in Rock Creek, we have 2 other projects that are slated for design, which is Wheaton Woods and Glenmont neighborhood. And they should be completed under contract by the end of the fiscal year. This just represents our Green Streets location that I'll be talking about today. The purple is the Rock Creek watershed, and the yellow is the Anacostia. And this is just a map that focuses on some of the projects we have currently in design, under construction, and completed. With a primary focus today will be Sligo and Paint Branch and Northwest Branch. Arcola Avenue is one of the first projects we built with the Department of Transportation. It was identified as a project where previously the Department of Transportation came in along Arcola. There was a lot of pedestrian activity, and it's an arterial road and a cut through. And so there was a lot of impacts with pedestrian safety and speeding along the road. So they came in and put traffic calming features in, which did not incorporate a lot of landscaping features at all. So we came in with the Department of Transportation and integrated the LID into these areas. So we're integrated behind the curb and also within the shoulder area. Some of the key design considerations: subsurface utility investigation. It was one of the first steps, which is extremely important when you're working in right-of-way. We use a private utility locator, and so they're collecting all the information and integrating it into the CAD design very early on, so you know where all your utility constraints are. And one primary component was reinforced curb. The reason for that was the stability of the snow plows and the abuse that curbs take within the right-of-way. It's really important to provide that stability and to limit failure with bump outs. Pedestrian safety is also a major component, especially when you have a lot of activity, people walking to synagogues and using the sidewalk. And maintenance of traffic is an important component for us. And during construction, it's important for the safety of the workers and is a very expensive cost item when we do construction, especially on the very busy roads. Typically, we have to shut down a lane, do the excavation, add the soil, and so forth. So we have a small window when we can do that during the traffic hours. Arcola was completed in 2011 with cooperation with the Department of Transportation. It treated about 2.4 acres, which included 8 bioretention cells and flow-through bump outs at a cost of $640,000. Next project is Forest Estates, and this is more of a neighborhood project where it's located in Slugger Creek watershed, and is another partnership between Department of Environmental Protection and Department of Transportation Renew Montgomery program. In this program that Department of Transportation has Montgomery County is they go into these neighborhoods that they prioritize, and they replace in-kind curbs, sidewalk, and asphalt. They mill down the asphalt and resurface. So we partnered with them to integrate stormwater management as a component of their project. We were integrating projects with primarily behind the green panel, or within the green panel behind the curb and sidewalk. And you have to note that many of these are within in front of people's homes, so they're used to using all their yard up to the curb, which they maintain, and so it required a lot of coordination. Some of the key design considerations is, of course, subsurface utility investigation, geotech, and reinforced curb, as I spoke before. Factoring in the street trees along the right-of-way, there are a lot of mature trees, how we integrate our designs, try to reduce the impacts of the critical root zone, and because trees are assets of the community, and for us, we'll be able to protect those as necessary. Pedestrian safety, we have a lot of people that walk their dogs, utilize the neighborhood, kids waiting at the bus stop. That was an important factor in the safety depth of the facilities. Homeowners' daily activities, and what I mean by that is how they use their front yard, how they get out of their car, how they get out of their car and use their sidewalk, enter their driveway, where they place their recycling bin, their garbage can. It all has to be integrated into the design because you might see this nice lush green area. You think it's all available for your project. Until you excavate, you design, excavate, and then you realize that you didn't provide any space for these people to place the things that they need for their daily use of their property. And properly sized inlets is pretty important for us. We get a lot of leaf debris from the trees, down branches, and if you don't have a properly sized inlet, then it's liable to block up with road grit and then bypass facilities. So this keeps the facility functional and also with maintenance in the future. The Forest Estates included projects that involved, or practices involved bioretention gardens, rain gardens, grass bioswales, and it was also a Rainscapes neighborhood. And I'll talk a little bit about Rainscapes later, but this was a targeted neighborhood where we have another program through Rainscapes where we work on lots to integrate various LID practices on the lot. So people recognize that it's just not the road contributing to the runoff, impacting the streams, it's the residents, and everyone has a stake in improving water quality. Here are some of the projects that we identified. We originally identified over 45 projects, and through a lot of outreach with the public and design constraints, which could be utility, soil infiltration, just grading the slope issues, it was reduced down to 24 projects, or 24 sites. And we did a series of walks with the neighborhood, with residents in the neighborhood. So we brought out the designs. We met with each resident where the facilities were going to be located, and that was a continuous process throughout the design, and it's quite involved, and it's very important to engage residents. And the feedback from them is they want curb appeal, which is understandable, and it's in front of their house. So integrating all that design to make it look functional and aesthetically pleasing. Here are just a few pictures of just showing the area behind the curb, excavation, and then the final product. Here are some more examples. Overall, the 24 facilities treated 5 acres of impervious with a total cost of $815,000, which included design and construction, and it was completed in 2012. There's a link there if you would like to look at our designs and go into further detail with pictures and the website. Dennis Avenue is an adjacent road. It's an arterial road near Forest Estates, about a mile long. It's in the Sligo Creek watershed, and this is another partnership between DEP and DOT, where we're integrating within the green panel features, the median, and using the open space adjacent, as you can see in this photo, where we're integrating a long swale that'll pick up runoff from the roadway. Again, key design features, subsurface utility investigation, extremely important. This area has all kinds of utilities, gas lines, water lines, sewer lines, and overhead power. So a lot of constraints and a lot of infrastructure to work around. Geotech was really important because it's limited in what amount of storm drains is available to determine if we can get enough infiltration, or we don't need under drain, or if we do have to incorporate under drain, how far we have to go to tie that into the storm drain. Reinforced curbs, as I spoke previously. Street trees, again, very important. Also, looking at adjacent trees on private property, or another aspect that we tie in to make sure we don't impact the critical root zone and damage trees on private property. Pedestrian safety, and also recognizing what the homeowners' daily activities involve. And emergency snow removal was something we learned at one of our public meetings. We had ideas where we wanted to put bioretention in the median. And after speaking with the residents, they said, well, during an emergency snow removal period, they have to move their cars from the road. And the only place where they can park, since they don't have driveways, is that they park in the median. So they were, where we had proposed a bioretention cell, that was their parking spot for heavy snow. So that's a really important component, is to integrate, and don't always assume that you're in the neighborhood, you know where the best place where a facility could be built. It's working with the property owners, and otherwise you're going to get a lot of pushback, and have their involvement integrates the project into a project that people are going to accept and support. Again, maintenance of traffic. Dennis Avenue is a very busy road, it's a cut-through road, and a lot of traffic, and it's quite dangerous to work there. So maintenance of traffic is very expensive for us. At times it could be almost half the project cost. We have to shut down lanes, redirect traffic, and be able to integrate the facilities within the area. Here's an example of one of the bioretention cells we built. But primarily the practices that are integrated include bioretention gardens, tree box filters, curb extensions, parking pads, underground rain store infiltration devices, grass swales, step pool conveyance in one of the storm drain channels, and Rainscape rebates. What I mean by Rainscape rebates, we have a rebate program through Rainscape's program, and we target areas that drain to encourage residents to build projects on their own property, and they can receive a rebate for various practices. Here's a schematic and an aerial photo of Dennis Avenue. There were over like 40-some projects or BMPs identified throughout the area. It treats about 20 impervious acres and an estimated cost of $4.8 million. And it's built into 3 phases. I'm currently working on the first phase, and then there are a series of other phases. As you can see the purple points, that is our 3rd phase of the project. Franklin Knolls is located Northwest Branch. It's another Department of Environmental Protection and DOT Renew Montgomery program, where they are replacing curb and sidewalk and milling down the road, and then we're integrating our projects with their efforts. You can see that most of the area in these photos represents a lot of the neighborhood. There's actually some areas where the green panel is very small, where we can integrate a lot of practices, but they're typically between 8 to 12 feet wide, and we're able to integrate bioretention, rain gardens, and other features in there. As you can see in the lower picture, you can't really probably read the sign, but we do, as part of our outreach walks, we put signs where we're going to put the facility, so the residents, like a week beforehand, so the residents know that we're going to be putting a facility, what type of facility, and to encourage them to come out to the walk on a Saturday. That brings a lot of people out. They have an understanding. It brings dialogue and understanding to the design. Again, some key design considerations: subsurface utility, the geotech, the curb, street trees. This area has a lot of limited storm drain, so we're doing a lot of geotechnical work to where we can infiltrate. And if we can't, then if we have to incorporate under drains into the storm drain. Pedestrian safety and homeowners. Homeowners in this neighborhood, it's actually very interesting. They're very engaged, and also there are some people that, have worked and manicured their yards, so we have to work closely with them because, we want to impact maybe some of the shrubs they've put into the right-of-way and other features that they've installed. So there's a lot of dialogue and integration with our design. And again, properly sized inlets, making your inlets fairly large so they can deal with the leaves, the organic material, the branches, and the road grit that comes off the roads. Some of the practices installed include bioretention gardens, rain gardens, tree box filters, curb extensions, and also it's part of the Rainscapes rebate program. This is currently in design and getting close, nearing construction. We're 90% for the first phase. Total area treats 2.7 impervious acres, or 27.6 impervious acres, and a cost of approximately $2.1 million. And you can see the community walk flyer that we recently had in March. Probably had between 35 and 50 people there, and we presented phase 1 and phase 2 of the design, put out the signs, we had a lot of dialogue, and everyone was in great support. And we also had a Rainscapes program out there talking about the rebate program and how they can integrate stormwater onto their own property. Sligo Park Hills is another neighborhood. This is a very challenging site. And it's located in the Sligo Creek watershed. And it's another partnership between DEP and DOT, where we're integrating Green Street features within the green panel, traffic islands, median, and any open space that is available. As you can see on the photo up the top, actually the right-of-way is fairly wide. You can see in the background a lot of mature trees, and people have created a lot of off-street parking, as the lower photo indicates. So we're using that as one of our benefits to try to integrate infiltration and treatment into the design. Again, some of the key design features: utility investigation, tons of utilities along this area, geotech, and the curb, street trees. It's a highly wooded neighborhood, or heavily wooded neighborhood, sorry. And so a lot of mature trees on public property and private property. So we are looking at impacts of critical root zone, and during construction, doing root pruning and having an arborist there on call so we can integrate our designs and without harming the trees in the process. And we'll probably come back and try to do a lot of deep root fertilization to help the trees along. And topography is a key issue in this area. It's very steep, and there are very limited storm drains, so a lot of the road is conveyance. During high, intense rainfall during the summer, this road can just flood with lots of water down the slopes. So the idea of having these projects is to be able to, it's not going to reduce all the flooding, but it will definitely help. And originally, the Department of Transportation was going to come in and put a lot of storm drain in, and then with the public pushback, we went and cooperated with the Department of Transportation and came up with a green design that it was able to integrate the LID. Pedestrian safety is important here. There's a lot of cut-through traffic again, and then also there are no sidewalks, so there's very limited shoulder. Our designs integrate with people walking their dogs, walking through their neighborhood, walking to school. Again, maintenance of traffic and sizing inlets is very important. Some of the practices integrated into this design include fire retention gardens, rain gardens, tree boxes, curb extensions, and pervious parking pads. One of the pervious parking pad designs is that we're using a paver system, having pre-treatment, and then a lot of people have built their own parking pads that are not pervious. So we're going to be removing those, putting in a parking pad for them, but also we're getting the benefit by that being our stormwater treatment for that neighborhood. So it's a win-win for everyone, and we've worked closely with the public on the parking pads and how they're going to get integrated into the design. Also, to gain more volume, we're incorporating rain store into our features, so we're able to have collect a higher volume. And also, the Rainscapes neighborhood is involved, and currently they're building rain gardens now on private property, and that's also the component to help complement what we are doing within the right-of-way. Here's an area of Sligo Park Hills. It's a pretty large neighborhood. There are over 90 facilities that have been identified for construction. And some of those areas, once we start opening up the earth and excavating, there might be a few changes or a few sites that may drop, and configuration will be adjusted as necessary. It treats about 19 impervious acres. Sorry, advance the slide, but in the initial cost for the first phase is around $1 million, and then the following other phase, so approximately about $3 million to complete that project. White Oak is a project where it's located along Lockwood Drive and Stewart Lane in White Oak, Maryland, the Paint Branch watershed. And here it's one of our earlier projects where we integrated features within the green panel, and also along an existing shoulder. There's a lot of areas where it's been striped to reduce traffic speeds, and we're able to integrate our designs behind the striped line and the curb. As you can see, one of our colleagues here is looking at the organic debris in this neighborhood. There's a lot of trash and a lot of organic debris. So we're looking at ways where if we can't incorporate LED practices, how can we collect some of the organic material and the trash in modified inlets. In this neighborhood, we had a lot of gas lines, so subsurface utility, and it's very important geotech. Important in this neighborhood. This area of Paint Branch drains very well. So okay, the White Oak project. In this project, we're integrating bioretention gardens, rain gardens, bioswales, curb extensions, and modified inlets. And I'll show you a picture of a modified inlet. But the idea there is where we can't integrate bioretention or any other practice. We're installing inlets where we can collect a lot of the organic and trash debris before it gets relayed back into the stream system. But once you start looking at realizing and working on your projects and seeing what's along the curb line and you start capturing it, it's amazing what you find there. So at White Oak, we treated 7 acres at a cost of $1.1 million. We identified over approximately 20 projects or facilities. And you can see on the right side, we did a long linear swale. At the top, we did a bump out the various practices throughout the project. Also, part of our program, we have the Rainscapes implementation. This complements what we do in the right-of-way. It's very similar to the River Smart program. And so we have a neighborhoods program and a rebates program. The rebate program provides rebates for the residents to implement the various practices here: rain gardens, conservation landscaping, urban trees, pavers, pavement removal, green roofs, water harvesting, and dry wells. In the Rainscapes neighborhood, they work in targeted areas such that are surrounded by our capital improvement programs, and they implement projects on their property, and we pay a portion of that installation. To date, Rainscapes has implemented over 450 projects and treated over 11 impervious acres through the rebates and the neighborhoods program. Here are some of their fact sheets. You can find them on rainscapes.org, and they have a lot of good little fact sheets and worksheets for the residents and also for technical folks. Building projects also requires maintenance, and we have a maintenance program which has been very active over the several years, and it's funded through our stormwater utility program. And we have a contract through our maintenance section that goes out and maintains the Green Street practices monthly. And then they're inspected by our county staff. And for us, it's important, if we're building these projects, we need to maintain them, make sure they maintain the function as designed, and we can address any issues that may happen over the long term of the project. Some of the monthly maintenance practices, including weeding, leaf, debris, trash, and sediment removal. We get a lot of sediment in these facilities and inlets, as you can see on the first slide to the left. And it's primarily sand, and it's also a lot of road grit that's picked up from the tires and everything else that comes off the landscape. And once you start collecting these in these facilities, having pads where you can have cleanup pads below your inlet, and also we have a weir that we can pull out behind this inlet so we can get in there and shovel out the material. And this is just trying to provide more longevity to your practice. And seasonal maintenance includes pruning, mowing, edging, replanting, and also any media and mulch replacement. Primarily, we have not replaced any media we actually had to replace some media in a few facilities, but that's not a common practice. But mostly, we're replacing mulch, mowing, pruning, and edging, and some replanting depending on the winter damage that's occurred. Here's some of the maintenance fact sheets, and there's a website that you can go to pick up the fact sheets and also look at the maintenance section webpage. So they have a lot of great resources there for everyone to use. And our budget. And this is our budget for our CIP program from fiscal year 13 through 18. And highlighted are our roads, our CIP budget for our roads for FY 13 and 14. $13.4 million dedicated, and plus we were fortunate enough to receive grant funding from the Department of Natural Resources. We received $14.5 million through the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and that's going to be helping us to implement a lot of our roadway projects. And this map just represents the various Rainscapes and CIP projects we have throughout the county. You can see them clustered lower in the part of the county where a lot of the urban projects are. And we're updating this slide as it gets updated with all of our projects through FY13. We're approximately halfway to meeting our goal for our MS4 program. Currently, most of the projects are in design, and this summer we'll be implementing a lot of our projects. And this slide just represents just the reason why we're doing this and some of the projects that we have worked on. Top picture is the Army Corps project that we worked with them on in park and planning. And the slide on the right is Turkey Branch, which is a project that we've integrated a lot of, as a 3-mile stream restoration project and a stormwater project. It's been very successful. And anyone that has any questions?
Craig, it's interesting, as questions were coming up, you were subsequently answering them. this was a very super comprehensive presentation, and I think we at EPA are certainly looking forward to continuing to share all this great information by you and Pete and Fazil. Really, really super what's going on in this corner of the Mid-Atlantic is some great models. So I'm going to try to get to some of the questions that you somewhat answered, but maybe you can add a bit more. You shared the cost of each of the projects you featured, and it was interesting to see that from Arcola Avenue, where it was, I think, around $640,000 for 2 acres, and then subsequently saw that price drop for Forest Estates, which was less than $200K, and then I think Franklin Knowles averaged around $78K to treat 1 impervious acre. Could you speak to your experience in terms of the varying costs? And it seems like costs are, as you do more of these, the costs are going down. Maybe talk to that a bit.
Sure. Our cost, I mean, it varies between the sites, and some of the reason for some of the cost reductions or for Forest Estates, we don't have to do as much maintenance of traffic. That drives down our costs significantly versus Dennis Avenue. It could be a significant amount of the cost is just maintenance of traffic. But as for our costs, there are some swings in the cost, and it's based on, it all depends on the contracts. But currently, if you look by individual projects, there are some reductions, but also some other projects do cost more. So I think when they average out, we're still looking at around a little over $200,000 impervious acre typically.
Okay, great. And could you speak to how it looks like you've got some real successful coordination with your Department of Transportation, which of course has its own timeline in terms of projects. And this is an area that under the G3 effort we've been encouraging, is that to sync up the address of wet weather through green infrastructure, for example, with roadway resurfacing or other related roadway construction projects. Could you talk about that coordination? How have you achieved that? And also not only with the county, but could you talk to that with regards to the state?
Sure. I can mostly talk for the county. I mean, we can talk a little bit about the state, but mostly we work with our county and Department of Transportation. As for the partnership, I mean, it's taken many years to establish, which, I mean, I think I started back in 2004 working when we actually received some EPA funding with Prince George's County on some projects, and when we did the first LED conference in Maryland. And we started talking to them at a time, and it took many years to establish that, and especially with our MS4 program, that has helped to pave that way and integrating and understanding why it's important to all the departments in the county that have impacts to water quality, that everyone has vested interest and will benefit from the improving water quality in Montgomery County. So it's taken us several years at that, and we started back in 2010. We worked with the engineering side of DOT, and we funded the projects. They provided the designer, and then we coordinated and helped them along because they wanted to be able to integrate some of their engineers into using greener practices. So we were coordinating with them, and that's what initiated the Arcola project and also Dennis Avenue. And then they had an issue with dealing with the drainage of Sligo Park Hills, so that's where we teamed up to be able to bring different disciplines to address the problem for Sligo Park Hills. And most of for our MS4 program, we're treating primarily only Montgomery County drainage, so that's either Montgomery County roads and parking lots and so forth in residential communities. So we've cut out a lot of the state roads because they have their own permit, and park and planning and other federal agencies. So once in a while we do coordinate with the State Highway Administration on projects such as Brewood, and where we are building projects in the right of way, but we're treating county drainage, and also coordinating with them along some of the stream projects in Sligo.
Great. And I believe you did hit on this one as well. This is a question. Are there stormwater utility funds, utility district funds for the projects? I think you mentioned that the maintenance program is funded through your stormwater utility program. Perhaps you could just talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Our entire program is funded through our stormwater utility program, including the maintenance. And we've had a maintenance program for quite a while, and they're in charge of also, besides the LID practices, anything that we build as a county agency. Plus, they are involved in maintaining facilities that are brought into our program from residential development. And so they have a transfer program, which you can, if people are interested, they can go to the website. That was on one of their fact sheets, at the bottom of the fact sheet, and learn more about that. But it's a different section also. But it's a great program, and in order to build projects, we need to be committed to maintaining them. Otherwise, it's a challenge to be building projects and not maintaining, especially in front of people's homes, where curb appeal and aesthetics is very important. And okay, thanks.
Yeah, obviously O&M is always just as important as the project itself.
Sure. Yeah.
Another question, road shoulders are sometimes used for ambulance and emergency needs. You indicated the challenges with regards to traffic. Was that an issue in terms of roads becoming clogged with traffic? Did you have to get approval by emergency personnel?
Well, we had to go through. We had to do a traffic plan, and we work with the Department of Transportation on traffic and the flow of traffic and what safety features we're going to have out there for the construction crew. If we're going to have signboards, barriers, and so forth, so everyone is safe, including the drivers, because they're distracted looking at what the construction workers are doing. And so we don't want them obviously driving into the cells and obviously hurting someone. Plus, in trying to keep the excavator and everything else separate from the lanes. So we work through the Department of Transportation, and we have to develop maintenance traffic plans. It does not involve, there's a flow of traffic. If we're closing a lane, we're redirecting a lane that's adjacent, so we're not closing a long area that would impede any emergency response.
Great. And since we're running out of time, perhaps one more question, and I'll remind folks that they can get contact information with our speakers. But could you speak to monitoring, and to what degree have you done any monitoring, or are you looking at monitoring as it relates to evaluating performance of your green streets?
Sure. Initially, through some funding through EPA and Dr. Chang at Prince George's County, who's been carrying a lot of the research in this area with Dr. Davis, we worked on one project where Dr. Davis from the University of Maryland did monitoring on some bioretention cells we built and looked at the effectiveness of those facilities, which are in a lot of publications. And we've been, on our side, I know Dr. Chang has been funding a lot with Dr. Davis. On our side, we've been looking basically on simpler ways to monitor our projects through pressure transducers and so forth, just because of we don't have a lot of direct money to fund towards monitoring. But we also have an MS4 watershed, which is part of our permit, where we are looking at flows. So we have Cisco samplers and in the stream, and we're monitoring water quality and so forth. And we also have various water quality monitoring stations throughout the county for our TMDLs. As for LID practices, we are mostly looking at pressure transducers and other methods. We have a lot of monitoring wells and we incorporate that into every design. Plus, it helps with any maintenance issues. So if you're able to look at that well and determine if there's standing water in there, at least you can narrow down where it is in the horizon or what the issue is. So, and it's a pretty inexpensive way to provide long-term observations for your projects. And then we also have a pretty extensive biological monitoring program. So we integrate all that with our projects to see how the insects and fish are on small catchments are responding to our projects.
Well, I'd say you covered all bases. Very, very impressive. And in fact, with that, we've come to our time limit. And again, I'd like to thank Craig, that was super, and Pete and Fazil for this great information that's been shared with us. And in fact, we realize that many people would have wanted to spend time actually hearing the broadcast. For those who couldn't make it, we will be posting it, as we mentioned earlier. So again, thanks to everyone who also joined us. And that's going to end our webcast for today.